Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with In Defense of Skepticism, how to believe nothing, doubt certain knowledge, dismantle dogmatists, avoid contradictions, eschew error, and never fall on the wrong side of the burden of proof again. In this video we're going to be looking at complete skepticism, how to doubt absolutely everything. We're going to be looking at kind of those stubborn beliefs, those beliefs that are really tough to get rid of, that foundationalists often posit as kind of our basic beliefs that are in some way indubitable. We're going to show how you can doubt even those beliefs here. Those stubborn beliefs that we're going to be dealing with are things like I exist, I am thinking, I'm in pain, something exists, and I do not believe anything other than this. So let's take a look. It's important to note that I exist and I am thinking we have covered before in our series on Descartes and the cogito. In this video, therefore, we're going to be offering some new objections to I exist and I am thinking. So if you're unconvinced by the objections here, you should also check out the objections that I offer in my series Doubting the Cogito. So, knowledge, before we get started, we have to remember, is knowledge is justified true belief with some gettier defeater. Just because you have shown that a belief is true doesn't mean that it is knowledge. Just because you have a true belief does not mean you have knowledge. It needs to be justified, and even if it's justified, it needs to have some gettier defeater. If you don't know what the gettier problem is, check out, I should now have not one but two videos on the gettier problem. An original video just explaining the basic problem, and then another video kind of in defense of the gettier problem, taking the conversation a step farther. Anyway, check that out if you don't know what the gettier problem is. But if you're unconvinced by my explanation of knowledge, imagine John. John might have the true belief that the Earth goes around the sun. However, if the reason that he believes this is because little leprechaun on his shoulder told him so, we wouldn't say that he knows it because it's unjustified. It's not justified that you believe everything that the leprechaun on your shoulder tells you. Probably because we don't think that leprechauns are real things and we think John is just having a little trouble. So, let's take a look at the claim I exist. Like I said, I've offered some other objections to this having to do with personal identity and such things, but here I'm going to offer another one. So, if you believe the claim I exist because an evil scientist poked your brain, and you're a brain in a vat, to make you think it, you may have a true belief you exist as a brain in a vat, but it's not justified. Why? Because the reason you believe it is that he poked your brain. Or maybe he poked your brain in such a way it seems that it's justified to you, or it in fact is justified to you. However, it is not going to pass the gettier problem because the justification seems absent from the actual reasoning you might have, such that you would show that that belief is true. One way or another, it's worrisome if the scientist can go in, poke your brain, cause you to have the belief, I exist, and you just form that belief and claim that you know it. Because it doesn't seem you know it. It seems the scientist could also poke your brain and convince you that leprechauns exist, that you are a brain in a vat, that you're floating 100 meters above the ground. The scientist could poke your brain in any number of ways and cause you to believe any number of things. So that belief, I exist, just because you have it, doesn't mean that it's justified. And even if you think that it's justified, it might be just appearing that the scientist has also poked the spot in your brain that says, my thought that I exist is justified, even when it's not. So, what about the claim, I'm in pain? For this claim, we need to go a little deeper. If the scientist poked your brain in such a way that you actually were in pain, then this claim would seem to be knowledge. You're in a pain state, you being in a pain state seems to mean that you can form the justified true belief that you're in pain. However, what if the scientist just poked the part of your brain that forms beliefs, and caused you to form the belief I'm in pain without putting you in the pain state? We surely wouldn't call this knowledge. It doesn't even seem to be true. And if it's not true, it's definitely not knowledge, and it's surely not justified, and even if it's justified, it won't be the gettier problem. So, it seems that just because you have the belief you're in pain, and it seems to you that you're in pain, you may not be. The scientist may just have poked your brain and had you believe, one, that you're in pain, and two, that you're justified in believing it. And just because you believe you're justified in believing it doesn't mean you actually are. What about I think? This is going to take a little more work. So, it seems that this claim justifies itself, and simply by thinking it, you know it. However, once again, this is not the case. Just because you think that you think doesn't mean that you're justified in it. And it may be true that you're thinking, because if you have a belief, you're probably thinking. But it may not mean that you're justified in it. Imagine that someone claims they're thinking, but when asked to explain, they say it's because they have a sharp pain in their left knee. You're thinking, oh, what's your justification for that? Oh, because it hurts right here. That's why I'm thinking. Clearly that person doesn't understand thinking, and it would seem that their belief, I'm thinking, isn't justified at all. Because there's a problem with their justification. That's not what it means to be thinking. Having a pain in your left knee is not what it means to be thinking. They are thinking, it's a true belief, but they are not justified in holding that belief. So, you might say that this is not the reason that you believe you're thinking. You justify the claim, I think, not with, there's a pain in my left knee, but with, if I believe that I think, that I'm thinking. 2, I believe that I think. Therefore, conclusion, I'm justified in believing that I'm thinking. There's a couple problems with this. 1 doesn't seem so indubitable as I think. 2 may be indubitable, but 1 doesn't seem that indubitable. Perhaps an evil deceiver has inhibited your ability to correctly formulate entailments, and your believing that you think is not in fact entail that it is the case or that it is justified. Perhaps modus ponens just isn't the case, or perhaps this is just not a case of modus ponens, and you just can't tell because there's an evil deceiver tricking you into thinking that it is. You might be mistaken that your logic is correct. You might be mistaken that logic even works. All of these problems seem to play into this scenario if you're going to justify your claim, I think, with this kind of an argument. And finally, I think there's an objection from Bertrand Russell that's not going to go as deep skeptically as I would like it, but it's another objection to throw out there, which is that we haven't proven I exist. So we can't use I to describe what's going on, as that just begs the question. This is a deeper objection to both parts of the cogito in some way, saying that it's a little vicious circle, and it's going to beg the question. Bertrand Russell would then say that, well, we can perhaps justify the claim that thought exists, but we can't say that I'm the one doing the thinking. That could be doubted in the ways I've presented before. But furthermore, we could be mistaken about our claim that even that we believe that we are thinking. We could mistake the sensation we generally associate with tickle for thought. Though it may be the case that we are actually thinking, we've come to believe this because we are being tickled. So it can't be knowledge. We've come to believe it based on an incorrect set of reasoning, an unjustified reasoning. So it can't be knowledge. Next up, we're going to take a look at I statements in general, because these are problematic statements. So imagine 2 beings, Rob the robot and Hugh the human. I'm going to name Rob after Rob Tote, who's kind of the inspiration for this little thought experiment, another YouTuber. Hugh has a chip in his mind that whenever he forms a belief, that belief gets transferred to Rob. Rob forms a belief if and only if Hugh does. So imagine Hugh forms the belief I am walking. Rob then forms the belief I am walking. When Hugh thinks I am walking, Rob thinks I am walking. However, Rob's belief I am walking is not justified even if it is true that he is walking, because it came from Hugh. It came from a source that isn't the reason for his belief. That isn't going to be justification for Rob walking. It would be justification for Hugh walking, perhaps, but it's not going to be justification for Rob walking. Rob might be walking for a completely different reason, and his belief is formed completely separately from him walking. So it's not justified. Rob does not know he's walking, even if Hugh may. Hugh forms the belief I am in pain. Rob will form the belief I am in pain. Once again, when Hugh thinks I am in pain, Rob thinks I am in pain. However, Rob's belief I am in pain is not justified, even though he has the same cognitive processes going on as Hugh, because everything he's thinking came from Hugh. His I doesn't really refer to himself, or if it does, it is incorrect. It is unjustified if it refers to himself, and if it refers to Hugh, it doesn't seem to make sense as an I in the statement. And finally, if Hugh forms the belief, I am thinking, Rob forms the belief, I am thinking. Hugh may be justified in making the argument that he believes that he is thinking, and therefore he knows that he is thinking. If you didn't believe my argument above, but Rob surely can't, any more than a computer that simply recorded your thoughts could be said to be thinking. It may assent to the proposition I am thinking, but only because you thought of it, only because you did. We can't say that something that just assents to the proposition I am thinking is justified in doing so, even if they've gone through the same reasoning process. The problem, of course, with this example is there's no way for you to tell if you're Hugh or if you're Rob. Because Rob's not going to form any beliefs questioning, why do I think I'm thinking when I'm not thinking? Or why do I think I'm walking when I'm not walking? Because the only beliefs that Rob forms are the beliefs that Hugh forms. There's no way for you to tell if you're Rob or if you are Hugh. What about the claim something exists? As with the claims we've listed above, just because you believe something that is true doesn't mean you're justified in believing it. It would be pretty tough to defend the claim that, in fact, nothing exists. That would probably be a tough claim to defend. Even the solipsist doesn't go so far. The solipsist who believes the only thing that exists is his own mind still has to believe that his own mind exists. However, just because you believe that something exists doesn't mean you're justified in believing it. And even if you're justified in believing it, that doesn't classify it as knowledge. You should check out the Gettier problem, which is a problem for knowledge and our understandings of knowledge. So just because you believe that something exists doesn't mean you're justified in it, because you could form that belief for the wrong reason. And your justification could be faulty. If, in fact, it turns out that the reason you believed that was wrong or was flawed, you would not have knowledge. There's no way for you to know that you have knowledge of something existing, and there's no way for this to be justified. What about, I do not believe anything other than this? It seems that it might be possible that you believe things you're unaware of. All of one's beliefs are not present to one's mind at all times. In fact, when you're dreaming, you might not have the belief that gravity works present to your mind, or that dinosaurs aren't a normal thing to be seeing wandering through your school. You might have a number of beliefs that you've forgotten at the moment, but will remember soon. It doesn't seem to follow that you can confidently assert that you actually have no beliefs, because you may not have current access to all of your beliefs, things that you would generally believe. It doesn't seem to follow that you no longer believe those things in a dream. You just don't have them present to your mind. And additionally, it would seem strange if you believed that you only have this belief, but don't believe that you believe it. This gets into something called the KK regress. I may or may not have a video on it up by now. Check that out, or check out the SEP if you don't know what that is. So, that was doubting our most basic beliefs. Next up, we're going to be looking at some objections to skepticism, some ones we haven't covered already. This is basically how to be a skeptic without contradictions. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody. Hello everyone, this is Thomas Kuhn. If you enjoyed that last video, you should check out these other videos by Carneades.org, or just subscribe to Carneades.org on YouTube for the latest updates. Keep shifting that paradigm, everybody.